Welcome here to Life FM. We are joined here by Terry Nightingale. So, Terry, please introduce yourself if you don't mind. Our listeners do actually know you. We've got some of your content that we play on the radio station, but they actually don't know something interesting that we found out a little bit about you is that you are actually also an author. So please speak to us because we're going to speak to you about your book today. So who are you?
Yes, well, good question. Who am I? That's a great question, isn't it? So I am a pastor. I'm a Baptist pastor serving in Western Australia. Haven't always done this. It's kind of a second career for me. I used to be a school teacher, used to be a science teacher, mostly in Christian Ed in the UK and in Australia. So I'm actually English. I'm from the UK, but I married an Aussie girl years ago, and we lived in England for a long time, and then we came out to Western Australia in 2003. The story we normally tell is we came out here for a year, and we're still here. Came out in 2003 for 1 year, and here we are in 26, and we haven't gone home yet. But we love it here. It's just a cool place to be.
Yeah.
And I found myself being called into the ministry, into church ministry, and so I trained to be a pastor, and that's what I love doing now. So I've got this really beautiful church in a suburb called Ellenbrook, which is up in the northeast sort of tip of Perth. Just beautiful people, and God is doing good things. But I, in recent years, have found myself doing a lot of writing, and around 5 or 6 years ago, I started doing a blog called 4 Minute Devotions, but I also started writing other stuff as well. So my first book was published about 6 years ago, and that was called Looking Back to Move Forward, which is a bit of a weird title, maybe, Looking Back to Move Forward. But it's actually all about what do we do when we face setbacks and discouragements, and how does God use that, And then you mentioned the devotions that I think you've been playing. So they started off as written devotions, as a blog, and I still send those out as a blog. But I started recording them as a very brief sort of podcast, then just carried on writing, and more recently, so the book we're talking about today, I just found myself fascinated about how God promises us peace in the toughest of times, And I got really hooked on the story of Jesus in the boat, where you got these disciples, and four of them are fishermen, right? So they should be used to storms. They've been on, that's their career. That's what they do. They should be used to rough seas and storms. And you have this big storm happening, and they're totally freaked out. And you think, wait a minute, you are hardened fishermen. You should be able to handle this stuff. But they're not. They're really frightened by it. So it's got to be a really serious storm. And Jesus's response, if that's the right word, is to fall asleep. He's just totally at peace. He doesn't worry about this at all. And he's finding peace in the middle of that storm. And I'm fascinated by that. And that's what made me start digging into that a bit more. But I also was really interested in the fact that that story is not the first time we hit that sort of thing. Because back in the Old Testament, you've got Jonah in a storm, and he finds a storm suddenly stopping. So, when Jesus was in the boat, he sorted it all out by just saying, quiet, be still, and the storm abated. Well, we have a similar thing in Jonah, where he's asleep in a boat in the middle of a storm, but a very different solution for the storm to die down with Jonah. He had to be thrown overboard and swallowed by a very big fish. So those two stories seemed linked to me in some way. But I was also asking, well, let's bring this to the 21st century. How do we find peace when when life is tough, when stuff is happening in our lives? How do we find peace? What does the Bible promise, and how does God help us? And so all of those were swimming around in my head when I started to look into this and talk to people. So the stories in the book, amazing stories of people going through really difficult things and yet finding the peace of God in the middle of it. So
Yeah.
that's where it's all come from, and that's what I do.
Wow. So you actually got ahead of me there. I wanted to ask you how was
I
the
know. I'm sorry. I
inspiration,
went off at a total
but
tangent, didn't I?
but don't worry about it because it sounds so obviously a lot of people wouldn't connect the two stories as well. So the story of Jonah, the story of Jesus in the boat, it seems to be two different stories, but it also I also know that can be connected because of the fact that it has to deal with peace and also with someone who's in a boat during a storm. So I think one thing that we can always look at is that we've got storms that we weather throughout our lives. Doesn't matter
Yeah,
if you're how young you are, how old you are. It doesn't matter from beginning to end. I
yeah,
think right through you've got storms that you have to go through. And it's interesting to see how each storm differs and so on.
yeah,
So it seems like that's definitely like your inspiration mostly for going
yeah.
through. Are there any things that you maybe had in your life that happened that really inspired this book as well, or maybe just gave some merit for you to say, okay, this is the reason why I wanted to look at this story?
Yeah, yeah. So what I normally say to people, and I don't mind admitting this,
Mm.
is that the book is full of my failures and other people's successes. So,
Okay.
to answer your question, it was sparked by an experience I had when I didn't find peace, and I started to think, okay, I didn't find peace in this situation. What did I do wrong? What am I supposed to learn from this? And the situation was that I'd been asked to do some teaching at a conference, at a pastors' conference in Kenya,
Wow.
and went there. Which was 2 years in a row. Went there with a friend of mine the first year, and it was a really great time. Really enjoyed hanging out with the pastors there, and just some really amazing people. And went home, and they kindly invited me back the following year, but my friend couldn't make it. And so I invited another friend of mine to join me, but he could only join me for a few days. For the rest of the time, I was on my own. And I found being on my own in another country very difficult. And
Mm.
I don't know why. Maybe some people can relate to that. I know a lot of people travel on their own, and so maybe those people can't relate to it. But my story was I found myself on my own in a country very different to my own, even though the people were beautiful and hospitable, and I was with a guy who's a good friend, who lives out there. He doesn't live over here in Australia, but he was becoming a friend, if you like. Um, I was very homesick
Sure.
and really, really struggling to be in a foreign country or another country on my own. And so I started calling on God. I started saying, God, give me peace, give me peace, give me peace. And I wanted to leave early and come home early, and I didn't do that. I stayed and I did what I promised to do. But when I did go home, I felt real failure. I thought, oh,
Mm.
what's wrong with me? And I still don't really know the answers to why I struggled, apart from the fact that I was just really homesick. Um, but it did make me start thinking about this topic a lot.
Sure.
And soon after, I started meeting people who were going through other really difficult circumstances. Actually, circumstances much more difficult than I was going through.
Mm.
So, for example, my wife and I met a lady in our church who was terminally ill,
Sure.
and her name was Joy, and
Sure.
she had such an apt name, because she really was joyful.
mm,
and didn't know what to expect. She was facing the worst situation in her life, and we went to visit her. And I'll never remember what she said. I'll never forget what she said. She said, um, Jesus has given me his ticket for heaven, and I'm taking it. She had such
sure.
joy in knowing she was going to be with him, and did not give any appearance of being afraid of dying. But she
Sure.
was just really at peace about that. And that really hit me, because I thought, wow, you know,
Mm,
um, God did give her peace. And I, in preparing for this book, I met other people with similar stories, facing really difficult things, and just finding that they could rest in Him.
sure.
And so, yeah, that's where it all started from.
Wow, wow, wow. So funny enough, I think a lot of the times I think I've got the same way of looking at things, but I mean that lady's story is amazing as well. And sometimes we also look at our storms though, and we compare it to other people, and so and we think no, our story is not
Yeah,
as great and so on. And I think one thing that people need to also remember, and or never feel that you have to compare what you're going through, because I think it's way different.
yeah,
And people, and for the listeners who are listening now, I think never feel like you should compare your storm and feel like it's not as great as someone else, because someone
yeah,
might have like cancer and they are so joyful, and you think to yourself, "Oh man, I've got my debt that I have to pay, and I'm like suffering over here,"
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
I think rather what we should do is rather use those people as a motivation for ourselves and just some encouragement,
yeah,
because I mean it's so great
yeah,
to see people, and it's not great to see them sick or so, but especially if they've got like some cancer or something that's very bad. But to
yeah,
see them so joyful and so on is really great, actually, because it actually does teach us a lot, and teaches us, especially because we've had some people that we've had to see very sick and so on, and unfortunately it's not lacquer, but it's tough, but it's something that where you can find some encouragement to see, okay, you know what, life is actually not about everything I think it's about, and we need to really be grateful for things and so on, that
yeah,
we take it for granted a lot, but I think
yeah.
one thing that stands out for me about your story is obviously you are sharing then your failures, and hopefully are you sharing at least some of your successes as well?
Yes,
At
a
least.
few. Yeah, yeah. I
No,
mean, to be honest with you, I don't mind sharing my failures,
that's good.
because in a way, I uh, I mean, I've been around a bit now. I'm in my mid 60s,
Mm,
and sometimes I've heard pastors, preachers, um, preach, share their messages, but when they give their personal illustrations, they only really share their successes. And the trouble
nothing
with
else,
that
yeah.
is that makes everyone feel inadequate, doesn't it? It makes everyone feel, oh, I could never live up to that.
Yeah.
And I think, when we're honest about our journeys, but also giving glory to God for when things have gone well, then I think I think it's maybe a bit more relatable, because then
Definitely.
people can say, oh, okay, he struggled with this, I've struggled with this, maybe there's hope for me as well.
Mm,
So, I mean, a story that I love to share as well, where God did give me peace was, when the pandemic hit,
mm,
I don't know what it was like where you were, but
yeah.
over here in Western Australia, we were pretty isolated
Mm,
compared to the rest of the world for a season. But when it did eventually hit our shores, I actually remember getting up and watching it on the news, and the days here, it's hit Western Australia, it's hit Perth,
sure.
and I was starting to freak out, as I'm sure lots of people were,
Yeah.
because we'd heard all the stories of how sick people were getting, and oh my goodness, what's going to happen if I catch it, and da 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 da. And hey, wait a minute, I'm a pastor, I got to be strong for everyone else, and but I was worried. So all of this was going through my head,
Yeah.
and I just remember the Lord took me to Psalm 84. How lovely is my dwelling place. and better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. And that's a favorite psalm of mine. I love that psalm.
Yeah.
But there's this little verse, about verse 3 or 4, in the middle of it that I've usually just glossed over because it's just a kind of little bit quaint. It's about birds finding their nest, near his altar.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always just glossed over that bit because it's just, oh, well, that's just a nice picture about sparrows and swallows and doing their thing, and then focus on what I think is the main part of the psalm. But I really felt drawn to those verses. And I think what God was saying to me was just look at these birds. They're building their nest, a place near my altar, near God's altar. In other words, they are setting up home in God's presence. They're actually learning to dwell in. Now, birds, of course, are not conscious of this at all. I don't know how much of a brain they've got, but they're, in that illustration, they are setting up home in God's presence, where people worship, where people give, where people sacrifice. And I think what God was saying to me in that moment is, you got to set up home with me. That means you got to be welcoming my presence throughout the day. It's good that you might have a Bible time first thing in the morning and then you get on with your day. But actually, I think what God was saying to me, no, I want you with me throughout the day. I want us communing throughout the day. I want you to build your nest near my altar. And, for me, that was then learning to be a bit more intentional about spending time with God, speaking to him in prayer more frequently throughout the day. And, after thinking about that, I did find peace. I felt really peaceful. And I think and I did what I felt the Lord saying to me, and that really did help me to quieten my heart in those challenging times.
Wow. And, I think that's one of the best places to live from is rather to live from his presence, We've actually got a reading plan coming out soon that's going to be called In His Presence. And it is actually about exactly that, where you're living, you can have your reading in the morning, you can have your quiet time in the morning, but you need to live from there as well, and then keep staying in his presence and so on. So it's amazing. And I think, if I have it correct, that pandemic time was actually also the time where you started recording the devotions, if I'm not mistaken. Hey, or was it actually before that even, or what?
Yeah, it was around about that time. Yeah, you're right. So around 2020, 2021, around there. Yeah. So I had just finished writing my first book, and was looking for a publisher. And after that, I started writing these devotions and putting them out there. So
because I remember that time. I actually received the devotions and I was looking at them and so on. And then we said, okay, no, we definitely have to start playing some more devotions on our radio station. So that's why I remember. But it's really, for us, it was a tough time, the pandemic. But I think the thing as well is in those times, we need to find peace, and also we need to remain in his presence. So I think, as you said, like just staying in his presence gave you that peace, just being conscious about the fact that, okay, yes, I've got my quiet time, yes, I've got my reading, but what else am I doing? Am I still remaining in prayer throughout the day? Am I still in his presence? And I think, as you said as well, it's amazing that you are sharing your failures in the book, which is really great to be vulnerable, because people want to connect with our vulnerabilities, and say that, oh, okay, this guy's not perfect, he's also got mistakes like what I have, and I'm not the only one with a mistake. So it just helps you with that connection. And but I think it's amazing to hear your story as well with the pandemic, because that isolation as well is something I think a lot of people could connect to. and
Yeah.
it's a victory, but it's at least it's not just filled with all the victories, and people feel like, oh, I've only got failures, So
Yeah.
it's really
Yeah.
amazing to have something like that to connect to, and I think as well to the listeners who want to know more. Where can they find your book? Is it available online? I'm sure it's available online for the guys here in South Africa and so on. And
Yeah.
where can they find it? Where can they find out more? And also maybe even about your devotions and so on. Please let us know more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Physically, the book, I don't know if you have any listeners over here in Western Australia, but physically, the book can be bought in our Christian bookshops here. So our retailer is called Koorong. So they're available here. But I guess probably most of your listeners are over in South Africa. Amazon is the place to go.
Amazon.
Um, if you just if you just go to Amazon and type in my name, Terry Nightingale, then you should find it there.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
So do you have an Amazon Amazon South Africa?
Yes, it actually launched quite recently. I think like maybe a year ago, something like that. I might be mistaken, maybe 2 years ago. I don't know. But quite recently it started opening up here. But speaking of like listeners in Australia, you wouldn't believe, but we actually do have a lot of listeners on our online stream now that are in like Australia, England, Belgium, everywhere, Brazil, USA.
Okay, wow.
So it's crazy to think that a radio station that's planted here in South Africa in such a small city, Clarksdorp, for us it's a small city and insignificant city, but actually it's not as insignificant as we think. We're actually reaching like a lot of people, which is amazing. So I mean, for the guys who are listening, if you guys are listening from Australia, you can head out. What's the store's name?
Koorong, Koorong. Okay. So people over here will know it.
Yeah, they will know. My uncle actually lives in Perth, so it's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, so someone, whoever is listening there in Australia, I mean, now you can head out to the local store and grab one. And I mean, to the guys here in South Africa, please go and grab a copy on Amazon. You can just look for Terry's name. I'll try and see if I can maybe find a link to it and maybe link it in our video description for the guys watching online. Then you guys can just go and look in the description and click on the link. And no, it's awesome. But thank you so much for joining us. It was really awesome to hear your story. Yeah. Yeah. So obviously you said you are a Baptist pastor in Australia at the moment, hey? Yeah. Okay. Wow, it's awesome. And it's awesome to hear your story. So what's great to hear is that you are someone who is preaching, but you're not just preaching the good stuff that you like people to hear. You obviously also heading into some of your struggles and so on, and people have the ability then to relate, and I think that's really awesome to see. And it doesn't matter. I think it doesn't matter if you're a young preacher, if you're an older preacher, if you're someone who's wherever you are. I think you should never just focus on the good stuff. Sharing how great you are and stuff like that. And I think it's really an awesome book for someone to connect to. And I think for the guys who are looking for, especially if you are in a time where you feel like you've really got struggles and you're struggling to find peace, I think this is amazing to connect to something like this where you are able to read stories and just go through obviously your stories as well that give you a little bit more insight. And I think the Psalm 84, as you said, where the birds are making their homes in God's presence, I think it's really awesome, and I think it's a great takeaway for the listeners. If you guys are listening right now and you're thinking, wow, that's really awesome, I mean, please go and show Terry some support. I think it's really an awesome book, and I think I really do enjoy your devotions and so on that we play. So thank you so much for joining us. It was really awesome to hear from you.
Thank you, Brandon. Really, really enjoyed meeting you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.